We just ended our Path of Exile 2 interview podcast with Jonathan Rogers and Mark Roberts. During this, me and my co-host Gazi TV had a list of questions we wanted to ask about Path of Exile 2, its development process, as well as a couple more technical details. In this video, we're going to be having a recap of this conversation, and I will highlight some of the more important bits and the more juicy details. Now, this was a 2-hour conversation, and if you wish to see it in its entirety uncut, that will be on Gazi TV's channel, which I will have a link in the description too. So with that being said, let me give you some of the highlights out of this chat. We opened with a question about game modes. Specifically, I used the example of Blight, fundamentally changing the way Path of Exile works into a tower defense mode. And I asked if Path of Exile 2 was going to feature more complete game-changing fundamentals within the game. This was their answer.
Other than the ones we've already made in PoE 1, we probably won't do any of those for launch in PoE 2, but it's something that we're always going to be adding. Like, I mean, because, once PoE 2 is out, there's going to be, the 3-month league schedule. We need to be adding these kinds of things at a fair clip. Whenever we're doing any of those kinds of designs, it's always like, usually what we do is we tend to be like, okay, let's find some random game that isn't an action RPG, get inspired by that, see, how would it look if we did this type of game in PoE, that's that kind of thing. And that's absolutely something we'll be continuing in PoE 2, like doing those other kind of interesting game modes. There are a few, I guess I probably shouldn't say too much about them. There are a few things that in PoE 2 that will be a little bit familiar, but also a little bit different along these lines. But they're not technically new in the sense that like they're similar stuff to what we've done before. But there are a few things like that going on. But I mean, there'll be lots more of that stuff when we get into league content for sure.
We often design leagues that end up they lack that X factor, I like to call it, which is that thing that makes it feel like a different game. So for, I'd say even just Affliction as the current example, the whole like effectively implementing a fog of war was what we did when you're having to reveal through that, and that even that just makes the game feel very, very different. And some go a lot more far-fetched or out there, going back to even Synthesis, where you have the whole puzzle board and you're putting pieces together. You've got the tower defense, you've got the...
I mean, people didn't like the farming simulator that we did.
Yeah. Well,
I had a special place in my heart for Harvest, but people just didn't... some people didn't like how it originally
Some
was.
people like it, but yeah, what we do learn from that is the more out there you go, the higher the risk. However, when what I like to find is when those things go core, they generally do a lot better. So when it's the league and it's in every area and it's something out there, you get very polarizing. Someone either loves it or hates it. Mm-hmm. But then when it goes core and then you can choose to participate in that, mm-hmm. It actually is a lot better. So in the case of Blight and the tower defense, you're choosing to do that. And if someone doesn't want to do it, they just won't touch it, right? And that's awesome. And so having those different mini game modes where you get to opt in and opt out is like very important when it goes core. But yeah, it can be very hit and miss with the league and a bit scary.
After this conversation, it pivoted in a different direction. We started talking about clarity. Clarity meaning how easy it is visually to understand what's happening on the screen, as well as readability, things like tooltips and understanding the mechanics of the game itself. We asked them to dig into their philosophy behind clarity in Path of Exile 2, and this was their response.
Visual clarity is a huge part of what we're talking about whenever we're talking about effects. Like, there's just a huge amount of that going on. So, like, be rest assured, right? Like, that is definitely a top tier priority thing as far as we're concerned in PoE 2. But that being said, we still have to make sure that you feel powerful at endgame. There's a lot of discussion, I think, about people always, they're going to slow the game down or whatever. But I guess I don't really think about it that way, because that's not our goal. Like, all we're really doing is like, what does a good game look like at endgame, right? And that game probably looks like it is a bit slower than what the top tier stuff that's going on in PoE 1 is right now. So it's not so much the question of like, hey, yeah, let's slow the game down. It's more like, let's make sure that that it feels, you both feel powerful, but also still have clarity of what's going on at end game. So that's just an explicit goal, right? I also think that it is a problem, even just from the point of view of like, if a new player looks at a stream of Path of Exile and they kind of see, like the crazy crap going on the screen, like they're immediately kind of like, oh my God, I can't even penetrate this. Like, it doesn't even make sense to me. So that obviously has to be, there has to be some kind of something changing here for sure. What I will say is yes, like visual clarity is hugely important. Telegraphing is hugely important. I guess there's not a lot I can say other than kind of like, trust me, I know. You know what I mean? Like, I understand it. It's important. I get it, right? Like that's kind of really all I can say at this point, because, you'll have to see it when we get there effectively.
After this, I asked about the new player experience when it comes to deaths. I myself have died, and it took me watching my clips over and over again to actually understand what killed me. I asked how they plan to address understanding death recaps going into Path of Exile 2. As a newer learning player of myself for the game, I find it difficult sometimes to understand where I am failing in terms of death. So for instance, I died to detonate dead and lost my hardcore, and it took me a while to even learn that what I died to was these red lines, detonate, explosion, corpses. So going into Path of Exile 2, what is your stance and kind of philosophy fee behind trying to teach people what it is they're failing to accomplish to continue the progressing through this harder content you're mentioning?
So there are a couple of things there I will say in particular. One is that just to be completely clear about this, the way Detonate did is in PoE 1 isn't good. And Mark has a specific plan. I think he's even going to change it in PoE 1 before too long, which I don't know if you're happy to talk about.
Ultimately, you got 2 corpses on the ground, and you don't know the life of those bodies on the ground, especially with the current just AoEing things down. And it is always bad for something like one of those things might deal 1,000,000 damage and the other might deal 100 damage, and you don't know. And so the problem with Detonate Dead right now is, yes, you cannot, I mean, aside from the fact 1,000,000 damage is probably unacceptable outside of the context of some bosses, you can't tell which of those is going to deal more damage. So we need to make sure that the tasks have been made to change this.
So you were saying about having like red flashes was like beep, 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 getting stronger and stronger. And then the amount of time that it takes is longer when the corpse has more life. So you've got more time to get out of the way the larger the corpse is. So you kind of get this like the telegraph actually changes based on the amount of life in the corpse.
Yeah.
And that way, Detonate Dead will be more visibly easier to understand. You'll be able to dodge it when it matters and this kind of stuff.
You should see it and go, that will kill me, and that will not, probably won't kill me.
Yeah. So Detonate Dead certainly bad in particular, but probably the thing you really were after was the whole like some kind of screen when you die that shows you kind of what killed you and so on. And this is something that I did discuss on Reddit a bit recently, but I guess I can go a little bit more into that. So the thing I was saying was basically that getting some of the way there is easy. Like saying like, okay, fire damage killed me. That's easy, right? Like we could make that happen really, really quickly. But the problem with that is that like, okay, it doesn't really get to the core of a lot of what really kills you. And I think it's important, like if you're going to have something like this, to really sort of tell you like why. So like we could even say with more effort, I think we could say like this skill of the boss killed you. But I think that's sort of fairly obvious as well. The harder part is, okay, shock is what killed you. Like when shock is on you, obviously you take more damage, right? How do you express that to the player? How do you let someone know that, oh, the shock that you had on you was responsible for a certain percentage of the damage that you received? And like what you'd want to say, like an ideal death screen, if it existed, would be like, okay, this debuff was responsible for 20,000 damage or something like that, But we don't have an easy way of tracking that. And it's like the whole that is coming up with a way to kind of like assign damage correctly to different kinds of effects like that is quite a big one. It's not impossible, obviously, we could do it, but it's just a question then of development priority. Like it's something that I'd love to have, but I think it's something that is probably like not quite good enough. But one thing that I had seen a suggestion recently that I quite liked is that when you die, it would be good to preserve the buffs that were on you so that you can mouse over them and see what they did, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's not a suggestion that that we've implemented yet, but it's something that I saw suggested, and I think it's a good idea. So that kind of thing would be great. And then there's been a few people sort of suggested, hey, what if you just dumped what information you do have into the client log, and then people can make some tools if they want to around that stuff, which I don't love as a solution, because it's kind of like one day I hope we can do our job properly and kind of get a proper thing like this in. But like, sure, as a sort of quick thing to do, that would probably be easy. So it's the kind of thing that I could see us doing as well, potentially.
Now, momentum is something I had noticed Jonathan had mentioned in the interview with Crip earlier. So I asked him how he planned to keep momentum of characters going into Path of Exile. In a game that the footage that we see seems like it's fundamentally a slower gameplay, he still seems to have a focus on keeping speed and momentum of your character. And I wanted them to dive a little bit more into this conversation.
I think actually that momentum preservation is actually a really important thing you need if you want to have things be able to be slower while still feeling fast. One of the things in PoE 1 is that, okay, if you have an attack that's really slow, it feels like garbage to use. And part of the reason it feels like garbage is because you don't have the momentum preservation. Like that kind of thing really helps. Like when you're doing a melee attack, the whole like full stop then attack thing just totally means that it feels bad. The momentum preservation effectively means that you feel like in your mind you kind of feel like part of the attack time was actually movement time. We've got this whole step attack thing where if you're a bit back from a monster, you can effectively attack it from further away than you'd normally be able to, than your normal distance would say. And we've got an extra animation to propel you forward. And what that effectively means is that the time that you would have spent running to the monster in PoE 1, you can now spend doing the attack from further away. So effectively get to have the attack be slower, but still take the perceptually similar amount of time as far as you're concerned. So that kind of momentum preservation stuff really works with that. You can actually make attacks feel clearer even when faster if you take care in the animation to do so. So in PoE 1, they've got one animation for every attack, and in PoE 2, we have like 4 or 5 speed variations for each attack, and we've got them all the way up to rather quite high attack speeds. And effectively, like you start removing certain flourishes and details from the animation. You don't you make the animation simpler as it gets faster, and that actually makes the character feel less frantic. Like they're attacking working faster, but they don't feel more frantic when they're doing so. And that's kind of a way to, once again, like improve the clarity of the attack without actually having to necessarily reduce the actual speed of it as well. So there's a lot of tricks there that we're trying to engage.
After that answer about momentum and animations, I asked a follow-up question about if adding these additional animations to clearly display how quickly attack speeds could happen, for instance, if this type of additional animations was going to alter their development time.
It takes time, but the rigs we have in PoE 2 for the characters are so much better than they were before that making 4 or 5 animation speed variants for an animation in PoE 2 takes way less time than it would take to make one animation in PoE 1 on the old rigs. Like, it is just a massive speed improvement. The other thing as well is that our lead player character animator Ed is just really, really, really good at it. So he can make that stuff so fast. It's honestly incredibly impressive. But certainly we do have to care about this because just the amount of animation that has to go into a single skill is quite high in PoE 2. But you honestly have to do it to make them feel good. Like the level of quality for a player skill is so much higher than it was in PoE 1 that it just takes there's just a lot more going on with that stuff. And I think the other thing as well, even for boss skills and stuff like that, there's a lot more care being taken these days than there used to be about making sure that like the skills all respond correctly to like weird stuff happening. Like, I remember being sort of impressed, honestly, when we were preparing for ExileCon, how not broken a lot of boss skills were with regard to things like CCing them with like freezing them and stuff like that. Like, it honestly is impressive. Like, I kind of saw that stuff and I'm like, oh, that's gonna look terrible. This is gonna look terrible. And then like actually they had like stuff to deal with all of those cases. Like, it's pretty impressive. So having to do all that extra stuff definitely makes development harder, but it is totally worth it in my opinion.
Except of course when was in the mercenary demos, that boss and she spawns a baby. I mean, that one you had on numerous occasions where you're filming it and you stun her and then all of a sudden she has twins.
Spawned a second baby. I still have no idea what causes that bug. We haven't fixed it yet.
I know the problem. I haven't fixed it yet. But and then she'll do the skill twice. And then all of a sudden there's 2 babies scrolling around and
still works.
Intended mechanic maybe. I don't know.
I mean, in real life sometimes they have twins.
Sometimes you have twins. Yeah. I don't know.
One of the most interesting points is that in Path of Exile 2, they mentioned that there will be a system in place to allow you to know the power of a passive skill tree node before you actually acquire it, essentially making your character easier to understand before you actually commit the resources to building out that character built into the game. Here's their answer on this topic.
We talked about this for quite a while and we kind of came up with an idea of like, maybe what we actually need to do is whenever you hover over a skill in the passive tree, it should tell you what the DPS change will be on all of your skills. And that way you will actually know, like when you see a node, like, okay, is this node going to help me or is this going to do nothing for me? Like, what's the relative, like, compared to this other node over here? Like, if I've got this node that's like plus fire damage, I want to see that the DPS on my SRS goes up or doesn't go up, right? Like, that should be something that you should be able to tell. And the other thing that will allow us to do is make it so that if you hover over a node and it's not going to do anything for your build because it doesn't actually work. Like, for example, like you'll see like a new player, for example, will be like, okay, if I get spell damage, is that going to increase the damage like they assume that it will increase the damage their minions are doing. And that's just not going to work, right? So you really need to be able to see, is that going to do anything? And so we basically said, like, let's actually try to make it so that you can see what the end result will be when you hover over a node on your character, when you're hovering over nodes on the passive tree. So that is a feature that we're going to have in PoE 2.
Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit of a different question. I myself really like audio and the music design in Path of Exile. For instance, in the Shaper fight, when you go inside of the red bubble, it actually dulls down your hearing. It sounds almost like you're underwater. And I was curious if in Path of Exile 2, they plan to continue their audio design at a high level, if they plan to bring in more musical talent, as some of the soundtracks are quite good in Path of Exile. So here's the conversation related to audio design in Path of Exile 2.
Some of the music in PoE 2, like a lot of it's really, really awesome. And there's actually a lot more going on even than what they used to do. Like a lot of really kind of clever stuff going on with boss mechanics. Like they've got like clever stuff going on with phase changes. Like the one on what's the mermaid boss?
I think Diamora, the song of
yeah,
death,
yeah,
or the siren of death. Yeah.
Like the phase change thing when she does her attack. Like there's a specific music cue that happens. Like exactly like it's real awesome. It's funny because I heard it in the sound booth and I was like, whoa, my god, that was the most epic shit I've ever heard. And unfortunately, it doesn't quite hit as hard on some random headphones that I normally play on. But yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff. And just little stings as well. Like I don't know if you like they've got this thing where like, okay, you kill the boss and you get this like little musical sting, and then it like fades down the music for the area for a little while to kind of like give you a bit of space to breathe after the boss is dead, and then like the music will come back in another like 20 seconds later. There's all sorts of little details. So there's actually a lot more effort going in actually to integrating music cues into gameplay events in PoE 2 as well.
Trading was also discussed in Path of Exile 2. We got a very firm answer on what their philosophy and focus will be in trading Path of Exile 2.
We honestly don't really have any plans to change anything in PoE 2 with trade, to be frank. Like, there's really not a lot. As I said, it's kind of, there's not really a lot I think that can change there easily without causing some kind of negative effect. So ultimately, we're kind of where we are. The most important thing, I guess, to say is that we are a game with trade. That's something that a lot of modern games are afraid to do. But we think is important. So, you know, there must be trade. We don't think it should be easier than it currently is. And so here's where we are. So you know, like I guess that kind of really is the end of it. But yeah, I mean, trade's obviously important for many reasons that we've gone over many times before. But yeah, it's just super important that we want to be a game with an economy.
Now, there was a funny moment during this live stream. Ghazi asked a question about unusable stats on items and how some items can just have an affix that does basically nothing. And there was a little bit of a shot sent out, and see if you can detect that in this answer.
Useless stats do suck, right? Like that is okay. There are games I could mention that have had a problem with this, of having a lot of stats you just don't care about, the values that you don't care about. So for number one, generally speaking, a stat, if it appears, should be something you can actually feel in your character, right? Like that is important. That being said, you do want to have at least a couple of misstats just because that is a thing. Like light radius was literally in the game for this reason. It's a stat that you're like in PoE 1 that's there to be like, oh crap, I got light radius, right? Like you want one or two of those. Now, I don't think that you want more than one or two of those. I think that that's enough to kind of be the kind of, light radius, you know what I mean? Like you want that, like you want to exalt something, and that's what you get to be an occasional result. But another thing that we did discuss is that we were kind of like, okay, the tier 1 version, well, I don't know what they're labeling tiers with these days, but I'm going to say tier 1, whatever the top tier of a given stat is, should be something that you care about no matter what stat it is. The top tier version of whatever stat it is needs to be something you actually really do feel like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like no matter what it is, right? So like if a stat is like, I wouldn't care about it no matter how much of it I got, then that is not a good stat, with the possible exception of light radius, which, as I said, exists entirely to be a foil.
One of the questions that we saw very commonly in the live stream from the audience was they wanted to know, is it a cross-platform game or cross-play? Meaning, does the game appear on multiple consoles, PC, varieties of ways to play the game, or do they all actually interact? Here, I pressed them for a yes or no answer, but here's what we got. Can we get some clarity on this right off the top? Console and PC interacting, yes or no?
I do want to be more clear about this, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where we can talk about it yet, unfortunately. But it is something I think is important, and I'll just leave it at that. And then we can confirm everything about details around that later on.
I tried. All I can do is try. I'll take it.
Yeah, I know.
Another common question from the audience was loot filters. So I brought up loot filters and asked them if they were planning to develop more customization features built into Path of Exile 2 itself. Here's their breakdown of that.
Honestly, I don't know that we need an in-game, like I don't know that we're ever going to be able to make an interface for that that's better than some of the websites that exist to do that, honestly.
Fair.
Like it's one of those things where like you know, this is another one, like a very similar question people have asked in a similar nature is, hey, why isn't the trade site in the game client? And it's exactly the same thing. Like I think a website is actually a better interface for being able to do that than a game client necessarily will be. There's probably a few things we could improve feature wise in loot filters, like just minor things to do with like, you know, like just some of the features around what you can mark up and a few other details like that. Like I think there's a few extra little visual styles we could add and bits and bobs like that I think could be cool. But yeah, like as far as like the actual interface for it goes, it's still just putting a file in a directory, I think is probably is fine enough for that. Of course, my hope is that you won't need a loot filter in PoE 2 initially, but it's still cool to have the customization that people can do, especially when they're talking about like they're trying to find specific stuff. Like it's always good to be able to do that. So
it is certainly my hope as well that in PoE 2 you will not need it beyond formatting things to look more important.
Yeah, sure.
As opposed to just hiding 99% of everything.
Because the community obviously are going to have the things of like, this is valuable, this is valuable. That's what they're deciding. And so obviously they're going to want to make loot filters that highlight
like
the important shit
it's
is.
cool that like white background, red text equals expensive item. Like that is, and it's big and right in your face, and you're like, that's awesome. You immediately get that without having to read. You immediately go like value. There's something valuable there just because you see the color.
But then we want the community to be the ones deciding what they think is valuable in that regard. So that's why the kind of like community maintain that. But ideally, you shouldn't want to have to filter items out entirely in PoE 2.
This conversation very easily rotated into a conversation around third-party applications. I asked them how they choose to decide which third-party applications are already covering a portion of the game and they don't need to worry about that, or how they choose to say this third-party application is doing something that we actually believe should be in the game. Here was the answer to that concept.
Well, so I guess the thing there would be like, how many things have we actually done ourselves? And I think
the trade website.
The trade website would be one of the big ones. There was a lot of dodgy stuff around third-party. It was all the RMT ads.
Oh,
yeah, that's right. Those third-party websites would cover in RMT ads. That was a
trades.
That was a bit of a that was a bit of a I think it really just comes down to exactly what I was saying before about like the new player. Like, will this feel more overwhelming or less overwhelming if a new player sees this as part of the expectation? So I mean, I'm happy for those things to exist. There's all sorts of like crazy tools out there. And honestly, like it would be cool if we did more effort to some APIs and things like that to allow more stuff like that to exist. I think it's fun when the community makes those tools. But it really just comes down to, is it new player friendly or is it not new player friendly? Like, can we do a better job or can we do a worse job? And these are the factors that go in.
And speaking of third-party applications, this is what they had to say about implementing Path of Building into Path of Exile 2.
I am not keen to have just Path of Building straight up in the game. That's one of those things where like, okay, Path of Building effectively lets you create items from whole cloth, right? Like that you don't, like you effectively just like, so okay, what would my character be like if I had all the stuff that I don't have? And that's actually not something that we're keen to do in the game. Like, it's one thing to show you what item you actually have in your inventory will do on your character, or like allocating a point that you have the points to allocate. It's another thing, I think, entirely to be like, okay, I'm just going to effectively make this character completely offline, which is, to be fair, like something that people will do with PoB, but I don't think it's something the game should necessarily do straight up. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea. I especially think it's actually bad for new players. If there's a character like just straight up like Path of Building style tool in the game, that's the game telling you that you're supposed to use it. And what that means, if you're a new player, you come along, oh, okay, I have to like plan out my whole build from the very beginning. Like that's not something that we should expect players to do. So I think it's a little bit different when you're like, okay, here's a third-party tool, you can work. Like people understand that stuff. But I think having the game be like, what would my character be like if I had a headhunter on when you don't actually have a headhunter? I don't think that's right. I do think we can do a lot better with regard to showing you the information about what a given thing will do to your character before you allocate it or before you equip it and that kind of stuff. And that's something I absolutely want to be doing and improving.
Can we then assume, based on what you guys just told us, that you guys are happy with the sheer quantity of third-party tools that people are utilizing, or in many cases even expected to use?
Well, okay, so there are some I certainly don't like. There are things that I think cross the line a little bit.
There are some tools that are like, okay, talking about some that are not allowed. Look, sometimes you go and trade with someone. Sometimes I go and trade with someone.
Yeah.
And they have unreasonably put all of that currency in the trade window faster than a human could. And I'm like, all right, that's questionable. And yeah, I could do something about it. But then I'm like, well, the fact that this many people need that is a development problem I want to fix. So, for example, I think in 3.24, we're going to be pushing for, if you control shift, well, you can control click all your currency into the window. If you do control shift click, it'll put all of the currency of your inventory into that trade window all in one go, right? So now you don't need to have this illegitimate third-party tool in order to do that.
And once we have that feature, then we can potentially start banning the people who use that tool.
Well, sure. I'm not to say there isn't people being banned for it or not. I'm just saying, like, I've gone and traded with someone and I see someone and, like, sometimes you go into, like, 300 latency and you want to control click your entire inventory of divines or chaos into a window, and it's like with the 300 ms latency, it's like, oh my god, this is taking forever, like, come on. And then sometimes you go to that same person to trade and they're just like, and you're like, okay, I don't know. That's questionable.
No one reports them because we love those We love those
Well,
people.
sure, yeah,
We buy a lot
there's
of
a
things.
reason- there's a
Nobody's
reason-
reporting them.
Yeah, no, because there's a reason we don't.
That's
There's a
why
reason we don't ban for that.
I could
now.
easily just be like, all right, I'm just gonna become a police here, or I'm gonna be like,
but
well,
it is against terms of use because technically you are doing multiple actions on one thing, and so that's against terms of use. But at the same time, we've kind of been like, like, I mean, it would feel a bit bad for us to ban people for that, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
So
but at the same time, we recognize, but therefore we come up with a solution to the problem. We do that, and then now it's like, well, now there's no reason for this tool to need to exist anymore, and that's an example of the kind of thing where we're kind of like, yeah, not so great.
I mean, another thing is the fusings and jewelers. We're going to add I guess it's more of an accessibility feature, which is that it's really only for getting 6 links or 5 links on 5 sockets or max links and socket counts. So it won't be used for getting a 5 link on a 6 socket, but we will have it that like if you hold the fusing, you can shift click fusings to keep spamming it. If you hold it down, it will use fusings at some rate per second. I haven't determined how many it uses. I don't want it to be like
And that way you
ultra
can
fast.
6 link without having a
So it might be
I
faster
love
to
this.
really click, but you'll save the mouse hand a little bit. It also obviously controller will get the same thing, so you can just hold down the button. It'll be like ding 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 ding. Some right. I don't know how fast it'll be.
After that, I wanted to end it on a positive note. So I asked them, why don't you shout out a few of the people that you really think are doing a good job right now in development of Path of Exile 2. So host some way to end the conversation. I want to thank Jonathan Rogers as well as Mark Roberts for being on the podcast. It was a good time. Here was their answer to that question.
My goodness, that's a real hard one to just like single out. Oh, you first, Mark.
Give a compliment. I'm digging for some positivity here. Is what I'm trying.
There's so many people though.
You know what? Blake has been doing a real good job managing the environment team, and honestly, the environment team don't get called out a lot because they're not responsible for gameplay. And so like they don't tend to come up a lot during conversations like this, but he's done a real good job just managing that whole team. Like you can ask him for something and it just comes back great.
I mean, you've got like Sam running that animation team amazingly. You've got Ed, who was already mentioned, doing the character animations, like all the player character animations done by Ed. Just amazing, right? You got Sam handling getting 700 monsters worth of animations done. Like it's ridiculous. You got Jason and the design team making pretty much every single boss, putting them together, like setting them all up. You've got Felipe doing every single player skill effect. Well, Felipe and Gabriel, but Felipe is like, pushing boundaries constantly. All that awesome new VFX stuff you see is like coming from his brain, his mind, and the player skills in PoE 2 just look phenomenal.
See, you took the chicken way out, which is to name lots of people.
I know,
right?
because
It's a hard question. I know.
I'm like, you have to name one, and that's hard, right? When you have to name one, that's hard.
I mean, you got Dane making all the items, and the items look ridiculously good. Joey handling the entire character art, all NPCs, all monsters, concepts. She's running that team. I don't know what to. And then okay, I'll give a special note to Tyler because he is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, and that dude is like outrageously good.
VFX.
Yes, VFX. He is just so good for being so new. Like you get these people that come in occasionally, they just have the eye for what looks awesome. He made most of the boss effects you see, and I will say it's most probably yes of the boss effects you see in like things like all the ExileCon bosses, and just like an absolute champion when it comes to that. He did the Voodoo King and Affliction.
Well, the fact that you're able to list so many of them off the top of your head, inspires confidence, I suppose. And it looks like you guys enjoy the team.
Oh, 100%.
Sure.
It is very important to me and to us, I guess, that we know who everyone is and exactly what they're doing. And we talk to these people almost every single day. Our style isn't middle management. We talk to someone who tells everyone else. Like, we talk to these people, we engage with these people all the time. And it makes it just the level of passion going on here is just amazing. And you see it in these people. We certainly give them the opportunity to, shine. Hopefully they see it that way as well, but at least I feel that happened. I mean, I can speak to that because that was me, right? You might not know this, DM, some people do, but like 11 years ago I started as QA in this company.
Oh, really?
And now I am one of the game directors and currently like running PoE 1 and alongside Jonathan for PoE 2.
Mark likes to tell the story about
I
wasn't going to hire you.
Yeah, he wasn't going to hire me. To be fair, not his fault. I walked in and these guys just asked me some questions in the middle of the room, and I didn't know this was the interview. And then I was like, and they were like, "Sweet, thanks for coming in." And I left, and I was like, Okay, well, I didn't get that job. And I just thought it was a casual conversation. I didn't realize it was.
I mean, that's because that's casual conversations of how we do interviews.
Now I know this is how things happen, but my my expectation of how companies worked was very different to how this one works. So anyway,
it's all good, man. My first
awesome.
interview, I showed up in pajamas because I didn't know it was an interview, and I did not get hired. In case you were wondering, so yeah, I've had similar experiences, but yeah, I want to thank you guys for your time. I want to, thank the whole team, all the people you mentioned, and I really appreciate you answering some questions. I know we had probably some hard ones. We had maybe a little bit more softer questions in there too, but it was enjoyable to have the 2 hours and change you guys have shared with us here today. So thank you for that. And last thoughts or anything you want to mention here at the end as we're wrapping up?
Thanks to everyone, including you guys, obviously. And good luck with killing the rest of the Ubers. I have been watching all of your boss kill videos, DM, and I really enjoyed your Cirrus one. Yeah, it's good fun to watch.
So thank you for watching this recap. If you wish to watch the entirety of it, as there are other more detailed technical questions that I didn't fully recap here in this video, there will be a link down below to Gazi TV's channel, my co-host for the Tavern Talk podcast, where you can find it in its entirety. Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing or liking if we've earned it in this video, and I'll see you on the next one.